Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to this week's edition of Paleo Perks. My name is Elizabeth Seibert. I'm one of the co-organizers of this adventure. And today it is my great pleasure to introduce Emma Karoune, who is going to give our talk today on open science practices in phytolith research and beyond. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get into today's seminar. Today's format is that we'll have a quick welcome and announcements. That's what's happening now. Emma will give her talk. It'll be about 30 minutes, followed by about a 10-minute Q&A time period. After that, we're actually going to go straight into an after-talk tea time with Emma, which everyone is invited to attend and encouraged to stick around, but it's not mandatory by any stretch. We'd love to see you, though. And I also just want to remind people to, for the Q&A period, please send your questions via chat to the questions at Paleo Perks host. And that's Kate today. Just a little bit of Paleo Perks specific housekeeping is that we value the participation of all folks interested in paleo sciences. And remember that participation is contingent on agreeing to abide by our code of conduct. So if you somehow found yourself in the seminar without having signed up, please head over to our website, check that out, and add yourself to the mailing list. We'd also just remind you to leave yourself on mute for the duration of the talk. And again, that you can ask questions by sending them via the chat to the questions at Paleo Perks host. We'd also just like to remind folks that we are accepting nominations for our potential speaker pool on an ongoing rolling basis. The other thing is that we now are practicing and checking out what it looks like to use closed captions that are built into Zoom. So you might see those on your screen. You can turn them on or off using the little arrow next to the CC button in your Zoom meeting controls. And then finally, there's a survey monkey for today's demographics, which is optional, encouraged, and anonymous, that should be popped into the chat in just a moment. So enough housekeeping. Today's speaker, Emma Karoune, did her bachelor's at the University of Bradford in bioarchaeology, and then her master's and PhD from the University College London. She then took a break from science formally and has been working as an independent researcher and science teacher. And I'm really, really excited for her to share her path both through education and through the research that she's been doing today. So with that, Emma, I would like to welcome you to start your screen share, and I look forward to hearing your talk.
Thank you very much. So I'll try and screen share. It took a while, just a second ago, so let's see how we get on this time. So tell me when you can see it, and I'm present. Now, can you see my screen now?
Not quite yet, but I think it just took a minute to load last time, so we can give it just a second.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, my computer needs thinking time. It's a bit old.
That's okay. It does think well, though.
Yeah, right. Okay. Gonna, on my screen, put the captions on. Can you see it now?
We can see it.
You can see it. Okay, so as Elizabeth said, I'm going to talk about open science practices in phytolith research and, well beyond that actually as well, because we're going to go on a whole tour of open science. So what I'm going to be talking about is three main things. So the first is the what and the why of open science. So I'm going to really talk about what I think open science is about and why I think we should be doing it, and also my personal journey to open science. Then I'm going to go on and actually talk about the project I've been doing this year, which is to assess open science practices in phytolith research. And then finally, I'm going to talk about what is happening next for me. So how I'm applying open science to my Phytolith research, and also how I'm continuing my project on looking at open science in Phytolith research. So first of all then, what is open science? And I like to start a bit with a definition. So it says here, open science describes the practice of carrying out scientific research in a completely transparent manner and making the results of that research available to everyone. Isn't that just science? And I really like that quote because it focuses on the two main aspects that are important, which is transparency and accessibility. But I do think that open science, and particularly the open science movement or open scholarship, actually involves a lot more than this. So to me, I think, and I sort of focus on three sort of key areas. The first is quality and quantity. And by this, I mean focusing on good scientific design. And so the studies that you're actually doing, the research you're doing, is actually finding something out in a very robust manner. And that can actually be built on by you further and other people in a collaborative way. And quantity in terms of reproducible and replicable studies, but also in the number of research outputs that you're producing and different audiences that you're involving in your research. Secondly, I think that obviously you've got to be open if you want to be an open scientist, and that means your research has to be accessible and inclusive. And that means that you should be sharing your research, working with different people, and generally being, I suppose, open, I suppose, as the word says. And then lastly, which is my favourite bit about open science, is working in collaboration and also working very diversely. And what I mean by this is that we do often get very focused on our own little bit of a project. And actually, I think we need to think much more widely when we're doing research. We need to work with more people. We need to try out different things. And we need to work with very diverse groups of researchers from our own field and also from other fields of science. And actually, I'm finding at the moment this new collaborative remote working that we're all doing because of the COVID-19 pandemic means that you can work with very diverse groups of people across the whole world. And that's something I'm really enjoying doing at the moment. So why should you do open science or take an open science approach with your research? So, I mean, to maximise impact is a big one, which I think research should really think about, because open science will increase your research output greatly. All of these outputs that you're producing can be made much more findable by putting a digital object identifier, or DOI, on the bit of research, and therefore are individually citable pieces of research. So this is not just publications, but data sets, software, workflows, blogs, talks, training materials, and other things, outputs that you're producing. Other reasons are to validate your research, so to have it checked fully in peer review by actually giving full access to your data and methods to the peer reviewers. And then there's reproducibility, so therefore having your research reproduced independently by a different research group. So this means your methods being reproduced and also the application of them being reproduced. And then there's reusability and accessibility. So your data and methods can be used by other scholars to build on and develop new research. And this is really by you being open to collaboration, meaning that these can be done with your input. And therefore, again, this is going to increase your research outputs. And then lastly, that I always think there's a bit of a myth about other researchers stealing data when you make it open. And actually, I think that making your research open means this is less likely, as more people will become aware of the work that you are actually doing. And also having open data and methods as a requirement for publication means that there is less academic misconduct in terms of bias in results and interpretation. So I hope you can see that open science and open science as an approach is a much more sustainable way to conduct research and has great benefits for the researcher themselves, but also the wider academic community and the public. So how have I actually come to work in open science? So as Elizabeth said, I did my PhD at University College London, and I actually finished that in 2006. My research then was focused on early agricultural communities in northern and eastern India, looking at macro-botanical and phytolith remains. And after that, to be honest, there wasn't really any job prospects going on. So I decided, because I wanted to sort of move forward with my sort of skills, keep learning things, that I would go off and do teacher training. So from about 2007, I've been working as a science educator, mostly in teaching, but doing lots of different teaching roles, examining, tutoring. I've done a few university outreach projects, but all these sort of science educator things. And actually in this time, what I've been doing, actually, I've been finding is I've been teaching a lot about scientific methods. So I've taught students that scientists do really large studies. They think about accuracy, precision, replication, and focus on their data being valid. So children really are taught that scientists carefully consider the scientific design of their projects. So then, coming back into academia, sort of full time in 2019, as you do, I spent a lot of time doing reading. And I was finding many articles about something called the reproducibility crisis, and then people talking about this need for open science. And I think I was quite shocked by that at first, as this was not really a thing when I was studying at university, even when I was studying my PhD. And if you've not heard of the reproducibility crisis, it started in the field of psychology, with studies being retracted by journals, and it's really radiated out from there to other disciplines. And this phrase, the reproducibility crisis, was coined in about the early 2010s. And then in 2016, Nature did a survey where they found 90% of the respondents, who were scientists from lots of different fields, thought that there is a crisis of reproducibility within the whole of science. And they found that still their respondents, 70% of these scientists that they surveyed had tried and failed to reproduce another scientist's work. So again, this is quite shocking, really. And so from this reproducibility crisis, the current open science movement has sort of grown, and is still, unfortunately, a bit at the edges of most disciplines. And I think this is particularly the case with paleosciences, palaeoecology, and I also work in archaeology, and that's definitely the case in archaeology. But as a science educator and academic, I do feel a strong responsibility to embrace open science as an approach to make my work transparent and accessible to all, and really to live up to this image of robust scientific design that I've actually been selling to my students, because I don't really want to disappoint them, I suppose, is what I feel. So what do I really want to tackle using open science? And because I'm really a Phytolith researcher, what I want to do is sort of apply this to my field. So if you don't know what phytoliths are, which often people don't because it's quite a specialist field, is they are these silica bodies that are formed within living plant cells by the uptake of soluble silica from groundwater. And being silica means that they're very robust, and therefore they survive well in archaeological and palaeoecological deposits. They are used for an ever-expanding number of applications, so to identify crop plants, to look at environmental and climatic change, and even now radiocarbon dating. But I do feel that there are some big issues that need to be addressed, and particularly the lack of reproducible methods, and also the application of these methods, because it is common that these new methods of analysis are not sufficiently reproduced by the researcher that develops them, and even rarer that they are independently reproduced by other labs. However, to start to move towards more reproducible and robust methods, we actually need to address the lack of available data and the lack of standardised methods within phytolith research. So this does sound like quite a big job, which I think it probably is going to be, and quite a big shift within phytolith research, I hope. So to start to address these three issues, I decided to find out what the situation was like in phytolith research by assessing open science practices in published articles. And this would give me some data to actually present to other researchers to start to influence this change that I wanted to actually happen, or I do want to happen. So what I've done is I've taken and created a data set from 16 prominent archaeological and palaeoecological journals over a 10-year period. So I took 2009 to 2018. And I chose to do the same journals and time period as a study of macro-botanical data by Lodwick, who published it in 2019. And that's so our data sets were sort of fairly comparable, not completely, but we could make some comparisons between them. So this actually produced 341 articles of primary phytolith data that I pulled out of these journals and this date range. So I collected information about data sharing, so the format of the data and the reusability of it. I looked at metadata, which is all the other information that should be shared with data to give details about the different parameters around the study. So in this case, I recorded information about the pictures and photographs that were included in the article, methods given, so whether there was a protocol actually given or whether there was references to methodological papers, and also the use of the standardized nomenclature, which is the ICPN 1.0 for Phytoliths, and whether that was actually being used in the paper or not. And then finally, I collected information about open access and what type of access was given to the article and the data. So what did I actually find? So in terms of data sharing, I found that in any format, data sharing within this data set of articles was 53%. So this obviously needs improving because we ideally want everybody to be sharing their data if possible. But I then went on to make an assessment of the quality of data for reusability. And this was whether there was raw data in a supplementary file or in an open repository associated with the article. And I actually found this to only be 4% of my data set. And this is not even an assessment of the gold standard of data sharing, which is the FAIR principles. So the situation, unfortunately, is worse than 4%. The other issues that I actually found when I was looking into data sharing was that there is a large lack of consistency in the application of journal data policies. So the editors and reviewers are not enforcing the policies that they are putting out there to authors. And this is actually leading to less data sharing than there should be in the articles in my data set. Graphs were the most frequent form of data sharing, and they are being accepted by journals as data sharing, but actually they are not really data sharing because it's very difficult or actually impossible to get any reusable accurate data from graphs. So I would actually say you need to put some tables in there somewhere. There's also problems with putting tables in text because it's incredibly time consuming. If you think you want to do a project to collect some data from articles and you've got to get it all out of tables that are within the text, that's going to be very time consuming for that researcher. And also probably there's going to be some copying errors going on as well. I also found that there's problems with using supplementary files because I found these were really poorly labeled. Actually, to find out what was actually in most of the supplementary files, because most of them were labeled supplementary file 1, supplementary file 2, and not referred to in the text. If I wanted to find out what they were, I had to download them. And again, that's very time consuming if someone wants to access your data. And then further to that, most of this data in supplementary files is actually behind paywalls because in most journals, it's not just the article that has to be open. It's not just if the article is not open access, it's not just that you can't read the article, you can't actually access the supplementary files as well. So that means the data is not accessible. And then actually there's a very poor use of open repositories. I actually found that only one article out of the 341 in my data set actually used an open repository to put their data in. So then I went on to look at metadata sharing, and I found that this was pretty inconsistent. The pictures were often shared, I would say in most of them, so I think 74% of the articles, but not all pictures were included for all of the different Phytolith morphotypes that are identified in the study. So this is something that does need to be improved so we can look at identification across different studies. Full methods or some sort of method was included again by 70% of the articles, but I question whether these methods are actually usable methods, because there is a big difference between putting a description of a method into the text of the article and actually putting a full protocol of the method in a supplementary file. So I think when we're writing articles, we need to think about, can somebody else replicate my method? Because that is the point of putting your method into an article, so that somebody else might be able to use it one day. And then I also looked at the use of standardized nomenclature. and the ICPN 1.0, which is only, I found, being used by about half the articles, so 51% of the articles in the data set. So what can we do to think about improving data and metadata sharing? Well, we really need to aim to use the FAIR principles. If you've not heard of these, they were proposed by Wilkinson et al. In 2016, and FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. It's thought to be the gold standard of data sharing, and most disciplines are now working towards these standards. This is something that I am trying to address at the moment by forming a working group for for Phytolith Research, and starting to look at how existing data could be stored for reuse in a fair way. So I just wanted to give you a bit of an analogy about FAIR data to just kind of explain it a bit more. So my analogy includes food cans. So you would not be very happy if you went into a supermarket that was filled with cans that didn't have any labels. So food cans are packaged in different ways and contain important information about the content. So the annotation of the labels on the food cans is important if we want to be able to find the product where product we want, to improve accessibility of it, so to have it on the right shelf in the right aisle of the supermarket, to combine that product with others, so to make it interoperable, so maybe that's the nutritional information on the back, and to be able to use or reuse it, so that might be the labels, the recipes on the labels that you might see on some food products. So that is the idea with the FAIR principle. Your data needs to be somewhere others can find it easily, so you tell people where it is or how they can get hold of it. It needs to be accessible, so not behind a paywall, so ideally putting your data into an open repository. It needs to be easily combined with other data sets, so there must be some agreed standards within your field. And it needs to be in a format that can be reused, so it includes the raw data and some well-described metadata. I'm putting a big however on this next slide, because what's called verification of data, which seems to be something that's happening a lot at the moment, can be very tricky. And so it takes some time to actually implement the FAIR principles. And it is best decisions on how to do this are a collaborative effort, and actually they need to be a collaborative effort within your discipline, because the application of the FAIR principles is going to be discipline specific, and it really isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. And you can see here, this is my attempt to think about the FAIR principles in sort of applying it to Phytolith data. So then in my study, I went on to look at another aspect, which was open access. So there is still a really great issue with how research articles are made accessible to other researchers and the public, and the majority are still behind paywalls, unfortunately. So in my dataset, I found that 14% of the articles were gold open access. So this means that they are freely available from the point of publication. But I actually wanted to go further to see which publications I could get hold of anywhere on the internet. So then I found, I was able to find 73% of the 341 articles somewhere on the internet in some form. So this could be delayed open access by the journals, because some journals will delay your access for maybe 6 months or a year. Other places, and the majority of them, I actually found on academic social media sites such as ResearchGate or Academia, and also other ones on institutional repositories. So I do think this is quite a positive outcome for Phytolith researchers, and I do hope that just raising awareness of this might improve it to 100%, which I think is what, as researchers, we should be aiming for. So here are some of my suggestions about how we can actually get to this 100%. So, I mean, if you can afford gold open access, then you should be doing that, really. And you can check if your institution has a deal with a publisher, because quite a lot of institutions now do for certain journals. So you can put your publications in those, or your funding might also include the article processing charge. So you can check on that as well. You can actually apply for funding to pay the APCs. So I know within archaeology, internet archaeology has a funding available, and also there's going to be new funding from the Association of Environmental Archaeology to pay for open access articles. You can ask for a fee waiver. And now I know a lot of people don't like the idea of that, but actually other people paying the APC actually pays for fee waivers. And I have to say that I have benefited from fee waivers. Being an independent researcher, I can't afford APCs at all. So I've just asked for them basically from the editor. You just have to send an email to the editor, explain your situation, say, I really want my article to be open because of this reason, please can I have a fee waiver? And in my experience, you actually get it. So please do ask for that. The kind of easiest way to do it is actually to make your articles open is actually to go the green open access route. So this is depositing a different version of the article in an open repository. And you can check with the journal you want to use whether they allow this, but most of the journals actually do, although they don't often advertise that they do. So this means you can put a preprint. So a preprint is an article that hasn't been peer reviewed, or you can do a postprint, which is an article that has been peer reviewed, but it doesn't look like the formatted version of the article that's going to appear in the lovely journal. But you can put that in any open repository that you choose. And there's lots of free ones out there that you can use. You could choose to go a completely different route to using a journal. So there's lots of these peer community in groups now. So there's a peer community in archaeology, there's a peer community in ecology as well. And this is just a different way of publishing now. I mean, we get a lot of our articles online. So I think this kind of model, which they have reviewers that you can put your article there, the preprint of it on a repository, they access it, they get people to review it, and then they recommend it. So it's like it is exactly the same as peer review, but it doesn't then go on to be put in a journal. It just stays on their website as a recommended article. So it's kind of an alternative way of publishing. And I think it's probably a way which we are going to be using more and more as academics. And then the last thing on the bottom is academic social media sites. Now, quite a lot of people who talk about open science do not like ResearchGate or academia, but in my data set, I found that actually it really increased the accessibility of the articles. So I generally say, please do use these social media sites. Advertising your research, but also for more long-term storage, put the article also on an open repository. So yeah. So I also want to stress to you, and I apologize, it's a bit of a blurry image on this slide. I want to stress to you that publications are not the only thing that can be open access. The whole of the research life cycle can be made more accessible. So there are many ways that you can open up your research. So you could write blogs or give talks to different audiences. And I have to say, I really like blogging at the moment. So you might see my work all over the place. You can offer free online training, which is a great way of making other people learn the skills that you're learning, that you have already. You can offer free online conferences like today's webinar or other large conferences. So this opening up of research to a wider audience, and that really improves inclusivity and diversity in your discipline. And I think particularly in a year where we've seen the Black Lives Matter movement being highlighted, and it really has been highlighting a lack of diversity in our field, but also in academia in general. So I think adopting a more open science approach can actually start to tackle some of these issues of diversity and inclusivity. So finally, I just want to talk about the research projects that I'm working on at the moment. I'm trying to adopt, well, I am adopting an open science approach with all of this research, and my Phytolith research, or my lab-based Phytolith research, I suppose I should put, I'm currently working on is a Phytolith reference collection for British plant communities. And Britain is rather a void when it comes to Phytoliths, so I'm trying to sort of fill that void at the moment. And you can see these pictures at the bottom here of me working at Farlington Marshes, and so I've been collecting soils and plants from there this summer, in the lovely salt marsh and the grazing marsh and the sand dune plant communities that they have there. So this work really aims to create taxonomic identification criteria for the individual species, particularly the indicator species within these plant communities, but I'm also developing modern analogues for each of these plant communities that can be used for palaeoecological and archaeological studies. So this project, I'm developing it as an open project from the very start. So everyone has full access to all stages of this research. So I'm using Open Science Framework with the Google Drive and GitHub to make a collaborative workspace. I used Google Forms during the fieldwork this summer to collect data, and this was automatically uploaded to a spreadsheet on the project page. All the photos are available through the project page, and it is set up with a working research compendia to prepare open data and metadata for publication. The reference collection will be held to slides, and it will also be herbarium samples of the plants. It will be held at Historic England's laboratories, as is the case with their other reference collection. And I am also working collaboratively with colleagues at Bournemouth University so that we can replicate modern analogues for the plant communities to increase the robustness of the methods that I'm developing. In terms of the Open Science in Phytoliths Research project, I've actually been working with a group called Open Life Scienc to develop my project further. Open Life Scienc is an open leadership programme to develop skills across open science, and my project has 3 parts to it. So the first is raising awareness. So I'm doing blogs and talks like I'm doing today, and you can see I've started a new blog called The Open Archaeobotanist, and there will be a new post coming out later this week, so you can read that, which will be about collaborative working. I'm also working to increase the accessibility to open science skills, because open science actually does require you to Sorry, I'm back. My internet just completely dropped off. Normally it opens itself back up again, but it didn't do it. So I had to find the link and everything. So let me just start sharing my screen again. Where did you lose me?
We lost you right near your discussion of sorry, my brain just stopped. That's how I was gonna go. We lost you actually not terribly far on your data issues. Is that right? Wow. We lost you in raising awareness and increasing accessibility in science.
Accessibility, yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Can you see my screen again now? Or is it going to be slow? So I've shared my screen, but it might just come up slowly.
Perfect. I think you're all set.
Oh, is it? Okay. Just coming. I'm just presenting it. I'll keep talking. So I think you lost me in the accessibility bit, so I'll just go back a page, and then so you've heard everything. So as I was saying before I was rudely interrupted by the internet, I am working to increase the accessibility to open science skills, and hopefully you heard me or didn't hear me say that actually working in open science you do need to learn some skills. So I am developing a training workshop as an introduction to aspects of open science and open science tools and collaborative working, because that's something that you need to get used to. So I've been working and I took part in a book dash a couple of weeks ago with the Turing way to write a chapter about collaborative working using GitHub, and also to work on improving the accessibility of the book in different ways. So the Turing way is part of the Alan Turing Institute in London, and it started off as an online book about reproducible research, but has now expanded with other guides about research collaboration, communication and ethics. So they have regular events such as the book dash that I was involved in, and you can get involved in them because they're really happy to collaborate in any way with you, and you can contribute in lots of different ways. So it could be things like fixing bugs, it could be reviewing other people's work that they've written, and it could be writing new content. So really they really value anybody's contribution at all to the book. yeah, so I would encourage you to have a go, because it's a really good way of learning about how to work collaboratively. I've also been working to form a working group within the International Phytolith Society. So this is something that's still, it's in the process of happening. And this is to work on improving the fairness of phytolith data. And we're currently also in the process of trying to apply for some funding to develop subject-specific FAIR guidelines, and specifically really looking at existing data sets and how those could be used and reused by other people, and particularly for me, be made more findable and accessible. So in the future, what we want to happen is probably there to be an online repository for phytolith data somewhere out there on the internet. So I think I've probably talked enough. So thank you so much for listening to me today. And please do get in contact with me if you want to know more or want to collaborate on one of my projects. And please feel free to ask me any questions. So thank you very much. And my details are on there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Emma, for that lovely talk. Excellent job. And we're sorry about the technical mishap.
Yes, I'm sorry. I apologize.
You know, this is what happens when we're all on Zoom together.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it sounds actually like we've got at least one question at the moment, but I'd like to remind everyone to please feel free to send your questions to the questions at palaeoperks host, which that's Kate today, and I'll make sure to read them out. But for now, I just want to ask, how do you feel about incorporating citizen science efforts? So things like maybe image identification and other stuff like that into your open science framework and efforts?
Yeah. I mean, my fieldwork this summer was meant to be really a citizen science project, because I've been working with the Botanical Society of Britain and Ireland, and they've actually funded my research this summer. So I wanted to take local botanical groups out with me and sort of teach them about how to work to form reference collections and things like that, more practical ways of doing it and actually collecting plants, because often botanical groups go out and they're really looking at the plants, and I wanted to sort of show them a sort of going further from that. And unfortunately this has been curtailed by COVID, and so actually I had to recruit a very small select group of a student from Bournemouth University and a colleague from Bournemouth University who came to help me, as well as family members, because with the COVID you have to keep people that are in your household. So I actually had my son, my 10-year-old son, who actually came to help me on my fieldwork this summer. He was the best research assistant I could have, actually, because I paid him in McDonald's. That's all he wanted to get out of it. Was a McDonald's lunch. So yeah, so I'm really into citizen science, and I really do actually feel that I think within the citizen science sort of bubble should be outreach with schools, because I do feel, being on the more botanical side, and I know especially within the UK, botanical sciences is going by the wayside. There isn't actually any university courses within the UK that offer botany as a single degree now. It's within biological sciences, and you can only actually specialise in botany at master's level and PhD level. So I really do feel that we need to encourage more students into field work, into the type of I call them the sort of doing science sort of field. So you're actually looking at the plants, you're looking at the bones, you're actually looking at the material, because everybody seems to now, I'm not dissing people for this, but are going into genetics and things like that, but they're the actual sort of more, I would say, traditional aspects of botanical and sort of biological sciences are going away, unfortunately. So yeah, I really would like to do quite a big citizen science project. I think that would be really interesting.
That's great. I also really appreciate your desire and drive to include school children as a major part of that. I think that's phenomenal. And here's hoping that next summer's field season is better, right?
I hope so.
So we've got some other questions coming in. So from Jack, it says, great talk. We've been performing a synthesis project this year, and your highlights of closed science issues really hit home. Consistently performing open science is a major shift in the way many of us produce research. This necessarily implies more work in the short term and perhaps in the long term too, depending on context. Do you advocate for slow, gradual reform as more people are sort of raised in an open science guidelines? Or do you think that the crisis is bad, as some claim, and we should radically rethink priorities for researchers in the very short term?
That's a really good question. Thank you for that. I know I always get, when I talk to other people sort of that I've been working in open science projects, they're always like, Emma, you think everything can be done now? Because I want it all to be done now, but I do appreciate that it can't all be done now. And it's, as I said, it's a whole new skill set for scientists that they have to learn. And at the moment, one of the issues is that at university level, these skills are still not being taught routinely. So that is something that is going to have to change, and probably will change quite slowly, I think. You know, it is going to be something which, when you plan a new project now, I think it is going to be something that you are going to have to start incorporating into it. Because I know within the UK, and the UK funders for research are now sort of stipulating that you must have a research data management plan. You must be openly your data must be open, your, you know, if it can be, your articles must be open, your research, all your research outputs must be open. So I think it's becoming a thing that eventually you're going to have to do it. So I think we should all be working towards that. But yeah, it's very difficult to start if you don't work in that way. And I do understand that it can be time consuming. But when I think, particularly when you're thinking about planning new projects, you need to actually think about the time, the extra time that it might take, and plan that in, you know, I think we should be planning in a person who is looking after a research data manager. That it's their job within your project to do that, because not all researchers have the skills to do that. And, you know, there should be dedicated people who are doing these jobs. So, you know, that is something when you're applying for big research projects, you should put that person in there, pay for their time, you know, because another issue in open science at the moment is that a lot of open science projects are done voluntarily. And actually, that's not right, really. It is a job, and people are doing it for free at the moment, most of the time. So yeah, I think we need to be planning this type of research better.
Very much so. As you're talking about this, I'm thinking about all of those times when I open up code that I wrote 10 years ago and think, oh my goodness, what was I thinking? And I do think that the more we think about having repeatable, open, well-documented science, the better everything becomes for even just like you as an individual a couple of moments down the line.
And I think also I'm lucky because I'm starting back into academia. I've been able to kind of think about how I want to start again, and starting these new projects allowed me to think about what, you know, how can I start this from the start so I am doing it in a way that I want to do it. And so I think I've had the luxury of that, really. So you know, going forward for me is easier than other people, I think, actually, at the moment.
That's fair. So we have another question that was put into the main chat so everyone can see it as well, from Catherine, who says, I love the slide on the spectrum of closed to open science practices. I've found many components of my work that fit outreach, blogs, curriculum development, mentoring students, some of the most rewarding aspects of this. However, I have a hard time finding funding and support for these within the academic reward structure, and jobs focusing on this tend to be low salaried. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Again, I think we've got to plan our projects better. Yeah, I think it's just something that we have to really think about. And I think, like I said, going forward, I think it is going to be something that is required, because I think that we are going to have to get more value from research and make research more sustainable. And the way to do that is to do it in an open way. Because, you know, if you're doing your research and you're just giving papers to the academic community, well, you're missing out on a whole bunch of other people that you could be telling your research to, or who could be using your research. So I think we need to be thinking a lot more widely with our research outputs and planning for that, really. You know, like you were saying about citizen science, you know, that's something we could be planning in all of our projects, you know, influencing the next generation of scientists.
Right. So that was a great point. There's one more question I think coming in, and I think after that we'll take a pause. But the last question that we have at the moment is, it says, it seems as if a lot of the limitations to open science come from the expectation that it largely be voluntary, as you've discussed, or rather sort of bottom up. But it really seems like to make this mainstream, changes need to come from the top, some funding reward structure, as you and Catherine have been saying. Do you have any ideas as how we researchers who might care about open science can attempt to actually affect this kind of top-down change in how research is done?
Well, one opportunity I saw recently was actually to get onto for early career researchers to get of a research funder, and I actually put my name forward for that because it's with the UK research, I don't know, UKRA, whatever, UKRI, whatever that stands for. But it's where all the research funders get their money from. So I think that's a really great idea. If you can get on the board of, or the panel of a research funder, and you can actually say, you know, this is something that we need to fund, this is the direction we need to be going to make more value of our research, and you should be funding this, you know, because I do think that early career researchers are really bought into open science practices, and it is actually the higher up you go within academia that are fighting more against it or not really adopting it, I think would be my point. So I think probably the change has to come from early career researchers. So if you can actually be there and say something in a meeting, that will have an influence, I think. I mean, there are a lot of open science projects you can get involved in. One that I recently found, which I think is really interesting, is in the UK we have something called the REF, which is kind of a universities, it's how they judge the research that's happened at a university, so the research outputs. And the majority of this is on publications. But obviously the open science sort of movement is not really liking this, I think I would put, because there are so many different research outputs now, like we've just been talking about, like data sets that you're publishing, software that you're making, you know, blogs, talks, everything else that you're doing really should be counting towards the REF. And at the moment it's quite restricted. So there's actually a project called the Hidden REF. I hope I've got their name right. So they it's UK based, but they are basically collecting data on these alternative research outputs. And it's projects like that that I think actually are really valuable, because it's actually demonstrating the value of open science and actually how it really changes science, or can change our view of research and what research outputs are. So I would suggest, if you want to get involved, you just find one of these projects. There's a lot of free training out there for you to access. So like I've been doing the Open Life Science mentoring scheme this autumn, which actually is a 16-week program where you take your project, you have a mentor who's a one-to-one mentor, you do training sessions on different aspects of open science, you have like upskilling training on different tools, and you get to develop your project within that 16-week period. So you have sort of different experts that you can talk to, and your mentor that you can sort of talk to on a one-to-one basis. And I found that really brilliant, because you actually do need someone to actually say, like, is this actually any good, what I'm doing? And is this is this a good idea? What might be another idea, that another direction I could take? So having those discussions with experts is a really valuable thing. So I know that the Open Life Science mentoring program is going to be putting out a call for more researchers to come into it. So they're hoping to have 2 cohorts next year. So if you're interested in doing that, look out in December. They tend to advertise through Twitter, so have a look for them, and propose a project. It can be they're called Open Life Science, but as you can see, I've done it. So I wouldn't necessarily say that we are in life sciences, although they seem to accept me as a botanist, but you know, I kind of wear a lot of hats most of the time. So yeah, they're very open to any sort of open project really, and because you can kind of fit in, and they'll find you they'll find you a mentor that fits you. So I had a really amazing, I've had 2 mentors actually. Ivan, who is a fish ecologist, So we kind of linked up on the ecology bit. And then I've also got Sarah, who she works for the Turing way. So she's kind of a data scientist. So yeah, they've both been really valuable to me. So yeah, I would definitely recommend doing some sort of project and finding some training out there.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to have you. And at this point, I think there are no more questions from our side. So I'm just going to snag the screen share to do a little outro here.
Yeah, I will stop sharing.
There we go. So thank you all for joining us today, and to Emma for that excellent talk. And we ask that those of you who have been in this talk, please fill out the SurveyMonkey link so we can learn a bit more about who attended and give us any feedback. We also would like to encourage you to join us next week to hear Natalie Umling from the American Museum of Natural History present a talk titled "All the Single Foreons: Should We Put a Ring on Area Density?" But for those of you who would like to stick around and continue this really great discussion that we've been having, we will be having a tea time with Emma. So we'd love to encourage you to stick around to learn more about today's speaker, their speaker path, and the work that they do. And also just to have a little chat and discuss with paleo fans from different backgrounds. Today's question of the week, which you can think about and we'll talk a little bit more, is what can we as researchers, especially early career researchers, do to make science more accessible to others? And so at this point, I'd like to say, everyone go ahead and take a 2-minute break, stretch, stand up. We'll reconvene here in about 2 minutes, and I'm going to leave this little timer going. So it was lovely to see everyone, and hopefully we'll see you all in 2 minutes.